Well, wide open gambling in Nevada really started in 1931 when the legislature, in the midst of the Great Depression, decided that gambling was a way to revive the economy. But when it did it, it really didn't have any semblance of regulation. There was no regulation at the state level at all. They decided to allow the local sheriffs to issue licenses, but they were being issued basically on the payment of a modest fee. The only requirement that was in the state statute at the time was that you had to be a U.S. citizen in order to obtain a license. So it was really in a situation where it was unregulated from 1931 until probably the late 1940s, early 1950s. Gaming licenses have changed dramatically since the start in 1931. And one of the problems with having wide open gambling is that it attracted elements of society that were not particularly welcome elsewhere. It included gamblers who were being run out of their home states coming to Nevada because it was legal here. But more importantly, it started to attract organized crime figures. And there was no secret about it. Individuals like Benjamin Bugsy Siegel was able to obtain a license for the Flamingo. Jake Lansky's Meyer Lansky's brother was able to get a license. So gangsters and others who were, not particularly well regarded throughout American society were coming to Nevada to open up casinos. This drew the attention of the federal government, and Estes Kefauver, the senator from Tennessee, had the Kefauver Committee, which was investigating organized crime, and they were looking at Nevada with a very, very critical eye. Frankly, if it was up to Kefauver and others, they would have shut down Nevada. They almost did. They passed an excise tax in the early 1950s that if it weren't for Senator Pat McCarran, the very powerful senator from Nevada, would have taxed 10% of all bets and effectively shut down the casinos. He was able to carve out the casinos and save the casinos. But it was pretty clear by that time that Nevada had a task ahead of them. If they wanted to continue the industry free from federal interference, they had to effectively change the licensing to get out organized crime from the casinos. So they started this in the 1950s. And if you're trying to get organized crime out, the focus shifts dramatically to licensing. It's to effectively not grant licenses to organized crime figures. And they started at the ownership level and started to weed out the organized crime that way. And then eventually put into licensing on all sort of subsidiary type positions with the casinos, all the way down to entertainment managers if they had connections with organized crime, with the idea of trying to ferret out organized crime. This era roughly lasted from the early 50s to, you can go all the way up to the late 1970s when they finally were able to get organized crime out of the stardust. So it was a long process. So Nevada's current regulatory structure really had its origin in the 1950s, when there's fear that the federal government would intervene within the gaming industry in Nevada. Nevada created a two-tier system. They created a Nevada Gaming Control Board, which has 3 members, which are really like the police of the industry. And at the time, there was a number of former FBI agents that sat on the Gaming Control Board. The commission, which started out as a tax commission, but then became the Nevada Gaming Commission, was really a blue ribbon citizens panel. There was a check and balance on the Gaming Control Board. And so that basic structure has survived to today. But again, in the 1980s, the emphasis shifted. It shifted from strictly licensing to keep organized crime out to operational controls. And so the Gaming Control Board which is really the police agency, started to expand its regulations and its authority to include accounting and auditing and internal controls. And the enforcement division started to take on employee work cards and surveillance requirements. So what has happened is it's branched out where you have a very comprehensive set of regulations that cover all these different areas and are imposed upon the industry to make sure the industry maintains a reputation as being honest, and people will get paid if they win, and has legitimacy in the eyes of not only the public, but in the eyes of the people who would finance the casinos.